think in the interest of time, we will get going tonight. My name is Jan Scoville. I'm the Dean of Regional Learning at NWTC and the manager of the Artisan and Business Center. And I want to welcome all of you tonight. Thank you for joining us. As we said earlier, this is going to be recorded and available for viewers after the fact. And we have been getting hundreds up to thousands of views after the video is posted, so no pressure, presenters. I know Carrie provided you an outline just to sort of check and balance all of your already knowledge and wisdom, so feel free to refer to that. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. I think we'll start with Ellen. Ellen is our presenter who's joining us virtually. So Ellen, if you want to kick us off, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. My name is Ellen Rosewall. I retired from UWGB in 2019, just in time for the pandemic, which is nice, I guess. And I managed the arts management program there for 20 years. So in retirement, I'm still teaching. I'm teaching online courses for several different schools around the United States, actually. And I am making art. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Thank you. How about we go to Laura?
My name is Laura Schley. I'm the City of Green Bay's Public Arts Coordinator. I was actually one of Ellen's students. I graduated in 2015 with a double major in art and arts management and lots of emphases in museum practices and textiles and painting. And clearly I just couldn't get enough, I guess. And after graduating, I had a number of jobs within museums and galleries and art studios. And recently, I guess not so recent, but my current position is with the City of Green Bay as the Public Arts Coordinator. So I manage a lot of our arts programming with the city, and we send out a number of calls for art.
Thanks, Laura. Haylie?
My name is Haylie Place. I am the Gallery and Program Specialist at the Art Garage. I've been there about 2.5 years. I'm also a UW Green Bay Arts Management graduate. I graduated 2019. I started at the Art Garage as an intern and have still stayed. I do a lot with coordinating exhibitions, install, going through submissions. I do a lot with programming in our workshops. And various other events like open mics and our story slams. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Alexis?
Yeah, my name's Alexis Arnold, and I took over Artless Bastard Gallery, which is located in downtown De Pere, about 2 years ago from the previous owners. Just recently, about the end of August, we officially became a nonprofit organization, so we're very excited about that. We offer open call for arts. We also sell handmade gift items, solo shows, group shows, and we also just expanded recently to what we're calling the Annex, which is going to be an area specifically for teaching and education, both for the community and for artists. I myself have been a photographer for over 20 years, fine art degree from UW Stout in Menominee, Wisconsin, and currently kind of dipping my toes into encaustics as well.
Very good, thanks. Well, I know I don't want to totally tell you what to talk about, but I know the first thing was on kind of basics. And I will let whoever wants to start talk a little bit about the basics. And, you know, if I'm thinking about, you know, entering a piece of my art, what should I be thinking about?
I think the number one, when you start to look for calls for art and want to submit your artwork for various projects or exhibitions, is to be sure to read the call to make sure that your work and coordinates with the theme, what exactly they're looking for, and be sure to read through all the instructions thoroughly, so you have a better chance of being chosen. And just to save time for everybody involved in choosing exhibition or choosing your work for exhibitions, projects, things like that.
Yeah, I totally reiterate that. I think, even I'm sure all of us have entered calls too. I mean, the first thing and foremost is just read the guidelines, that the gallery or museum or the city is offering. And, like she was saying, make sure that you can fit their timeline, because obviously there's dates that you're going to need to hit, whether it's submitting, delivering artwork. Make sure you're available for those, and then make sure you're really fitting what they're looking for. If, they're, specifically, I'll just give an example with a theme. If they're looking for landscapes, if somebody's looking for landscapes and you submit like a portrait, that's not going to make it in. So you want to really make sure that you're not just submitting just to submit.
Laura, why don't you go, and then I have a couple of comments.
I think both of you covered a lot as far as really just reading through those guidelines, making sure that you can meet those timelines, whether it is like dropping off a piece, having that conflict of, oh, I submitted it for this show and it needs to be out at such and such a time, or other things like that. If you're double booking yourself almost, kind of being aware of that. And then, yeah, I think for my calls, more so since it's with public art, a lot of the time, if you are interested in submitting something, you don't necessarily have that piece prepared. It's kind of a concept at that idea, or at that stage. So really making sure that not only are you following those guidelines, but that those guidelines work for you. If the project budget, like you have this fantastic idea, but if the project budget and the timeline just doesn't work out for you, I would recommend not applying for it, because I don't want to take advantage of any artist and have them submit a really killer idea, but the budget just doesn't cover what they need to be able to make the piece and pay themselves. So yeah, I think really just making sure that the calls fit what you have or what you're looking to do.
Okay, I agree with all of those, and I'm going to go a little bit deeper and say that I would say even read the fine print. I say think of the jurors, and the jurors are going to be looking at sometimes hundreds of submissions. And if for instance, here's an example of something very little. If they tell you to caption your piece with your last name first, don't do your first name first, please. Do your last name first. Last name first, medium, title of piece, how much is it? If any of those are out of order, it seems like a very little thing, but you have jurors who are needing to look at things very quickly, and the faster they can find what they need to know about your piece, the more time they'll have to actually talk about your piece. The other thing that I was going to say is when you're talking about basics and read the instructions, you all talked about deadlines and so forth, but I'll also talk about, and we might want to get this into this a little bit more, but shipping and picking up and delivery. If the call asks for you to send return packaging, for example, please do that.
Yeah, that would be a big thing. I mean,
yeah, we had one a couple years ago on a show that I was curating, and a woman who I didn't even know, she was all the way across the country, and she was one of the few non-locals who submitted to the show, and she didn't include the return packaging, and I didn't know what to do. We eventually found her, but it took a lot of time and energy to do that. So
yeah. Great tips. Those are really good highlights. So assessing that call for art, you touched on this a little bit, but yeah, maybe like you said, Ellen, going a little bit deeper on, assessing the call. What should an artist be, looking for?
Well, I think an artist should obviously be looking for the match with the call and their work. But I would say again, the more closely it resonates, the call resonates with your particular work, the more likely it is that the judges will find it worthy. And I think that if there's something, well, first of all, if there's something that you don't think the jurors will get, please explain it to us. If the theme is birth and death and you submit pictures of flowers, make sure that the jurors know that the reason you're submitting these is because they have to do with birth and death in this way or whatever. Because otherwise it's very likely that we'll glance through and say, this doesn't fit the theme, out, and I would also say, I think that if an exhibition is themed on some kind of a topic, not just like landscapes or portraits or whatever, as you were saying, Alexis, but like something like birth and death or pride or, whatever, you really want to send something that shows your deepest work on that issue. And again, the more superficial it is, the more you'll be competing with people who are, working from a very deep place in their own work, and a superficial work will be less successful probably than a strong work. So, to me, it's worth skipping over something if it only marginally fits your stuff, instead of trying to squeeze a round peg into a square hole. Just, look for calls that really resonate with what you do.
Mm-hmm. So trying to make a loose connection to a theme probably doesn't serve the artist very well.
No, it doesn't. And again, it's, it makes it's going to be less successful, so why take everybody's time?
I think the themes too, if you don't necessarily create whatever in that theme at, currently with your work, I think it's good for artists to use themes to stretch themselves and to try to create something new and different within whatever style they already work with. I think that's the fun thing about a theme, is that, a lot of times you can get into a rut as an artist. Maybe you aren't feeling creative, or you just haven't been, making like you normally do. Looking for these call for arts, looking for these opportunities can sometimes kind of spark something inside you. You're like, oh, okay, and you can create a piece for that. I'm not sure how it is with you guys, but there are a lot of museums and galleries where also you have to remember that they want pieces that have been created within the past 1 to 2 years and nothing past that. So they are looking for fresh pieces of work. I know Laura kind of touched on it before, but make sure you're not submitting the same piece to multiple calls at the same time, because, deadlines can sometimes run over. So let's say, for example, your piece does get accepted, into 2 places at the same time. So now how are you going to handle that? As an artist, you're going to have to, deny one of them. And what happens is, let's say, we'll just use the 2 of us, for example, somebody, submits to, both of our calls at the same time. And then, one of them, the artist says, oh, I can't, I'm not going to submit to the Artless because I'm going to be at the art garage. Well, now you've taken away that opportunity from another artist that could potentially have been juried in. So you also have to really think about that. Do you guys have a timeline within 1 to 2 years for artwork? Or
usually our current call for art, for example, is called a year in review, so it's
okay.
to be made within the last year. So sometimes it comes up that we do have a theme that coordinates with the timeline of when the artwork was created.
Yeah.
So, and I think there are a lot of places that do that too. So it's important, again, to read fully, to make sure that you follow each of the guidelines. And I think it's important to add too that don't be afraid to ask questions. If you read through the full call for art and there's still something that you're quite unsure of, I would say most places looking at it with calls out would be more than happy to answer any questions that you have, to make sure that it's beneficial for the organization looking through artwork submissions and also for the artists submitting their work.
But ask those questions prior to the call closing, not 24 hours before the call closes. Now you're really kind of obviously we're all busy and we're managing more than just calls. So, you know, we may not be able to get back to you in the time frame that you're anticipating. So definitely, as soon as you see those questions and anything comes up, reach out to, you know, the participating site right away. Yeah.
For those of you who are joining us live, feel free to put any questions you might have in the chat, and we will monitor those and make sure you get answers. Ellen, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I had a quick thing, and I was sorry, I was muted. I wanted to say that I don't know if this is the right place for this, but and now that I'm thinking of it, I'll just say it. If you don't get accepted, don't think that that means you make bad art. There are so many other considerations the jurors are considering. They're considering the space they have to fill, how many works that they can accept, what works in the space, and what works with the other works that they're going to be accepting. So it's you know, the entire show is also a work of art. Think about it in that way. And so the jurors are not only selecting individual pieces, but they're selecting something that will be of a totality a good experience for the people who are who come to the show. So anyway, just thought of that, so I thought I would put that out there.
Yeah, I've never thought about it in that perspective, Ellen. That's really interesting to think about.
And I'm sure all of you don't even want to look at ones that are filled out incorrectly or incomplete. So I would think you'd want to make sure you complete it correctly.
It helps. I mean, the reason why I think all of us have guidelines, you know, it's to stay organized. Like, we need to try to stay as organized because, you know, everything's on a timeline for us, right? From the time the call opens to it closes to, you know, sending it off to a juror, to them sending back what's accepted, or, you know, everything is kind of like on a crunch timeline. So we really need to stick to that. And that's why these guidelines are in place. So you're exactly right. Like, if something is off, it actually slows everything down for us. You know, with Artless Bastard, we do try to accommodate, you know, as much as possible. But yeah, I mean, yes, you made a very good point. It just kind of puts a kink into everything running smoothly.
Yeah, you're trying to be efficient because you're working with a large group of people when you're talking about people. So you're talking about the staff at the organization going through all these, the jurors, the artists themselves. So when the guidelines are followed, it just makes that process much more streamlined, and communication is better, and it lessens the chance of, you know, a certain submission falling through the cracks of being, oh, well, your images weren't labeled, so we weren't sure which pieces these actually were, so we weren't able to. And then you're trying to let everybody else know if they've been accepted or if they've been denied. And then you know, you don't want to lose track of all of these other random pieces that don't quite fit into the timeline you're trying to meet.
It's about being cohesive too, like how you were just you said that. Like, I've had, you know, some artists submit where, like, in their submission form they had one name, but then like their art's labeled a different name because they are using two different like names, you know, like their artist name and then like their name. Well, you have to you know, keep it consistent, yeah, because it's really confusing, because now it looks like when the submission comes in, well, did somebody miss filling out part of the form? Are these two separate ones? So it can be very confusing for us. You know, so again, yeah, just keep it as consistent as possible. Yeah.
I would treat it like a job application,
Yeah.
like a resume.
Mm-hmm.
What the jurors or the staff people are seeing, like, that is your CV. And you wouldn't want spelling errors or mistakes on anything like that. I know it seems putsy to, like, oh, I gotta rename all these photos and stuff, but like they said, it's confusing for you to have like 5 different photos with DCSM 580, DCSM 590. But like, okay, so compound that like one person's, and then we got 20, 30, like, that's a lot of DCSM.
Yeah.
We can't keep track.
Right. Some calls get hundreds of pieces submitted, So if you even have, you know, if every other person, you know, that could be hundreds of people that didn't follow the guidelines and make themselves ineligible. So it really adds up once you get lots of submissions coming in.
Yeah.
A couple of quick questions. One person was wondering, what are some of the challenges of curating a show in Green Bay / De Pere compared to other cities?
Well, I can't talk because I've only had the gallery in De Pere, so yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I guess I would just assume that, obviously if you're Milwaukee, Chicago, Madison, you're gonna have a lot more competition, right? Maybe versus being in a smaller community. So that's really when, like Laura's saying, you gotta be organized, you gotta stay, you gotta label your images, make sure everything is consistent, and like you're submitting a resume, so you really want to be on top of it. And it comes down to, we want you to be organized as well. So, just for example, like I myself submit to Call for Arts at other galleries and other museums. And when I do that, it's as simple as I have a folder on my desktop that just says Call for Arts. And within that, I have folders for where I'm submitting. So I label it with whatever it is. And then within that, I download, a PDF of their guidelines. The images I submitted, the work I submitted is in there. So because what happens is you're going to forget. Right? You're going to enter, time's going to pass. Sometimes it's months, sometimes it's, it's maybe, it could be, sometimes it's 3 months, depending on who it's for. And you're going to forget because you get back to life. And then all of a sudden you're going to get that notification in your email that says, oh, you're accepted, time to send your work. You have like X amount of time. And then you're like scrambling, like, well, what did I submit? Where is it? Da, da, da. And when you start reaching out to us, and I don't know if you encounter this a lot, but this happens pretty often with the galleries. People are like, I'm sorry, I don't remember what I submitted.
I have got something to be. I noticed that all three of you said, well, don't have much perspective there. I've lived in many different cities, but ironically, the only city that I've ever been an exhibiting artist is Green Bay and De Pere. So I can give my perspective from other cities as an art lover, not necessarily as an artist. But I just wanted to point out that the three ladies sitting at the table are representing organizations, none of whom existed 16 years ago. Mm. And that's the one thing I can say about, as the NWTC Artisan Center also did not exist. And I'm saying 16 years ago because the Art Garage is now celebrating its 15th year and is a grand, settled, established organization in the community. And I was on the board of the Art Garage for several years toward the beginning. And I remember when we celebrated our 5th anniversary, nobody thought it was going to get that far. So there's been a lot of concern in the Green Bay community that the community was small enough that it did not have a lot of opportunities for professional artists. And granted, 15 years ago, they didn't, and that's one of the reasons the Art Garage was formed, and ultimately NWTC decided to come forward with the art and business focus. And yay for Green Bay finally getting a public art commission. That I just, I just couldn't believe it when that happened. And they hired Laura, which is even better. So I think the main difference in living in a smaller community is that there may not be as many opportunities locally for you to exhibit, but there is a lot more flexibility, if you know what I'm trying to say. I think that in established communities, I lived in Minneapolis, I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, both of which are huge arts communities, but they're kind of set in their ways. They do what they do, and that's what they do. And, and there's a first tier of artists, and then there's a second tier of artists, and that's where you kind of are. I remember several years ago, my students, I don't know, I don't think Haylie, I don't think you were part of this group, Laura, you may have been, who interviewed local local musicians and asked them what was the good and bad things about being in Green Bay. And all of them said, we love being in Green Bay because you can do whatever you want here. You can make it up and people will come to it. And one of the people who was saying that has formed a couple of brass groups. The brass differentials, Adam Gaines, whose brass differential group has made a huge difference in the community, and Michelle McQuaid Dewhurst, who is started an annual competition for miniature compositions that last under 1 minute or less than 100 words. You know, so it's just a wonderful opportunity living in a small community, especially connected to all these other small communities in Door County and Sheboygan and so forth, Oshkosh, Appleton, that we can experiment. We can make stuff up. We can do something unusual and usually find someone who will help us with that. So that's my perspective.
And you know, it's interesting you kind of brought that up. It made me think of an artist that I know in the Minneapolis area. And when she comes here, she thinks that we have a lot more opportunities for art and that it's a lot more engaging and, you know, has like a better art scene, which is really interesting. So I think it's all perspective. You know, for her there, it's more private studio. So it's like private studio tours. It's not so much, you know, having gallery openings and gallery shows. So it is interesting how you would think, you know, oh, well, Minneapolis just must, you know, have tons of art opportunities. You know, but we do get artists that, you know, they're driving their artwork all the way from the Twin Cities, you know, so that have been accepted into our shows. So people are coming from other areas to show here as well. I think, again, it's the call that draws them and the opportunities, you know, like, so artists, you know, take advantage of what's in your area. I think sometimes we take it for granted that it's just here, but as an artist, you should be participating actively, you should be engaging, you should be going to these different events that you were mentioning and supporting them so we can continue to grow that.
The other thing I think that some people I hear is that some people feel that Green Bay is kind of closed politically, you know, that they might not be open to difficult work or controversial work or work on certain political or social themes. And I have just not found that to be true at all. The one thing I can remember is when years ago when the Neville Museum did a retrospective of Norb Cox's work, which is some difficult work for certain religious traditions. There was some organization nationally had a little letter writing campaign. Nobody from the area, you know, objected to it, but there was, so it attracted national attention. And what the Neville did was they had a forum where they had religious and spiritual leaders from different faiths and practices come to the Neville and do a panel discussion about the work. And I mean, I shut it right down. And now last year, the Lawton Gallery did Norb Cox, and I don't think anybody, you know, squeaked. So I really think people underrate our area as far as their open-mindedness to different kinds of art.
Which is a perfect segue for our next question. When you select work for an exhibition, do you select works that are safe and acceptable to people of all ages? Or are you open to the idea of art that provokes critical thinking and stimulates conversation? Is this something that you communicate in your calls for submissions?
Definitely don't censor any of our exhibitions. I think as long as it fits the theme that we are looking for, that jurors most of the time are very open to any type of work that would be submitted. If there is anything, usually it's stuff like nudity that will put a disclaimer at the beginning of the exhibition telling viewers that this is what you will see and hear. So it's more of that, just telling visitors that are coming that this is what you might see but we're not going to take it out of the exhibition to, to make someone comfortable, I suppose.
I mean, I feel like it's probably going to be different in a public art
Right,
perspective, versus,
Yeah.
yeah, it's going to hit.
With public art being in the public realm, and a lot of our work, not only does it have to pass through the Arts Commission, but then a lot of times it also has to pass through Common Council, which not all of them are real art experts. So
That's
unfortunately,
very generous, Laura.
we do have to ensure that a lot of our work is suitable for the public, because we can't have a little placard that says "Caution, there's a nude sculpture up ahead." So.
And is there a timeline like with murals? Are you guys like, is it 10 years minimum, or do you have that with the public art? Because I mean that's up for quite a long time. So of course you want something.
Yeah. For more permanent pieces, we definitely have that. I guess for all pieces, we kind of list the expectation of how long it's going to be up there, just for everyone to be aware. And to keep those expectations in check for how long it's going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
For our rotating art program, I just answered this question earlier today. We haven't had a lot of public complaints about public art that we've put up. A lot of the public art that we have put up is very tame. But for one of our rotating art pieces this season, actually, I did receive a number of complaints about it. And what I say for most of those when I do have a complaint is that thankfully this piece is only up for a year. You don't have to, it's not something that's going to be here forever. Maybe take an alternate route on your way to work or whatever. But ultimately, this is not permanent. And on top of that, see it as an opening for a conversation, a learning opportunity, if you will. You don't have to like it. I love art, and there's lots of art that I don't like. But I can at least have a conversation about it, and perhaps through that conversation, I might even learn to like it for a different reason or for a different aspect.
Yeah, I mean,
I think the question also, I think that there's certainly are calls. I mean, I personally, as a juror, I mean, I'm not on the staff of an arts organization right now, but as a juror, I consider myself very open, but it really depends on the purpose of the exhibit, the call, the funders, perhaps sometimes. I really love it when there is an opportunity for us to challenge people and be open to different kinds of things. I also know that there are starting to be programs and organizations in our community that are championing the art of specific cultures, peoples, and so forth. The gallery just down the street from you, Alexis, is something that's really new and interesting in Green Bay. And so I think that, as far as being open, I think all of us would like to be as open as possible when we can be, but as individuals, we're not the only ones making that decision. And so we do have to respect, as Laura said, if you have to pass it through the Common Council of the City of Green Bay, you need to have your answers straight. But I'm all in favor of finding ways to push that envelope a little bit.
You bring up a good point there, Ellen, about, who's jurying the show and how can an artist use that information, or how should they vet that? So obviously if you're submitting to the Green Bay Public Works and the Common Council is going to be looking at it, you're probably going to think that through. There's some politics there and whatnot. But what advice or information would you share about knowing who the jurors are? A lot of times the artist doesn't know who's jurying it. How does that work?
I can only speak from my perspective. Sometimes, like for instance, I'm thinking of like school shows and so forth. You know who the jury is because it's your professors. But for a lot, you know, the Art Garage, I've been a juror for the Art Garage, I don't know, a little over a year now, I guess. I can't tell with the pandemic. But I think it's a really good idea for some of those things that the artists do not know who the jurors are, because then they can't derive conclusions about whether or not they will be accepted or why they were rejected, or, oh, good, I'm bound to get accepted because, you know, so-and-so is on the jury, you know, that kind of thing. Or they don't have a chance to question the credentials, you know, of jurors and all that kind of stuff. So I think in many cases, it's really a good idea to just have a jury panel that is not known to the artists.
I think it's best as an artist to just ignore that, because once you if you start to turn your focus on to that, now it's distracting you from what you should be focusing on. Is it a strong composition? You know, what's your execution of the piece? Are you finishing the piece? Also think about that. I know we haven't gotten into that, like framing and all that kind of stuff, like overall final finished product. Really just focus on you and your work. You kind of have to put blinders on, and you have to block out a lot of those things and not stress about it or not worry about it. Otherwise, it's gonna kind of eat at you. And then also, I think a lot of times artists can use that as an excuse. Like, oh, well, I didn't get in because of, you know, this and that. It's like, no, come back, go right back to our basics, like we were talking about, you know. What did you miss? Did you miss something? Did you not label it correctly? Did you not fit the theme? You know, there's usually something in that beginning part that you missed, okay? Because you're rushing it. We're in such like a digital age where everything's so quick and so rushed, where you really gotta slow down and you gotta read. And I'm totally guilty of this. I mean, I've entered some calls, I'm like, and then I'm like, oh, I didn't get in. Well, because I'm sure I missed something. So it's, you know, you really have to take the time to just slow down. And like we all said in the beginning, just read through and make sure that this feels right to you in the beginning to even enter it. Right? Yeah.
I think it's important to look at it as a continual learning process.
Yes.
That you should stay true to yourself and your artwork. And if you get accepted into a show, that's great. But if you don't, I think there's always room for improvement. And so that's how you should look at that, is that, okay, I didn't get accepted this time. Maybe I missed something in the submission form, or maybe it wasn't quite what they're looking at, but it's always an opportunity for you to keep growing and learning as an artist.
And just because it didn't get accepted into one call doesn't mean it won't get accepted into another call. So you can't, I think it's easy for artists to like, we take it personally, right? We take it as like, it's a huge hit, maybe to our ego, and it's like, oh, I don't like my art, or doesn't. No. Like she said, stay focused on creating, doing what you do, what you're passionate about, and the right opportunities will open at the right time. And like we said, you don't know. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. Like I think, you know, I'll mention before, maybe there's not enough space. Maybe, you know, you don't know how many entries. You don't know. There's a lot of unknowns. You can't, it's better not to focus on that and focus on the positives. Take it as, hey, I created something new for this call. If you did that, get excited that it maybe pushed you in a different direction. And, you know, maybe now you can start a new body of work. You're not really sure where it will take you.
Can I circle back for a minute? I'm looking in the chat and I see the question about when you select work for an exhibition. And one of the things that we kind of ignored is the part of that question that says, do you select work that is safe and acceptable to people of all ages. I think it's important to also say that safe and acceptable does mean that we're taking different cultural triggers or societal triggers or whatever into consideration. That we don't want to put anything out there that may not be, say, a safe place for someone inadvertently. There's a difference between stretching yourself and being confronted with something that may be offensive or inappropriate for your own particular heritage or background or disability or whatever. I just wanted to stick that in. I know I'm going back to the former question, but I needed to say that.
Yeah, I think there's a fine line there, you know. Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you looped back to that, Ellen. Alexis, you kind of just skimmed the surface about, you know, framing, kind of finishing that piece that you're going to submit, and that gets into photography and you know, the time you put into, well, framing, matting, that sort of thing. Could everyone speak to that a bit? How does that, you know, play into the process?
You know, when it comes to submission, I've had, you know, artists be like, well, it's not framed yet, you know, is it okay to still submit? Of course, still submit. You know, really, you know, what we're looking for, what, you know, I think any submission is looking for is a clean, well exposed, you know, sharp image of your work, which can be difficult depending on what kind of medium you work in. But that's really what we want to be able to see your artwork, right? So like the framing is important when it comes to like your final presentation, but it's not going to make or break you getting into shows, if that makes sense. You know, and right now, unfortunately, a lot of stuff is hard to get. I mean, I was just looking at frames online and everything's out of stock and it's not going to be in for quite some time. So sometimes you're waiting, but you still need to submit to a call. So again, just kind of make sure you have, you know, that prepped out. But when it comes to, I know there's certain, you know, galleries or museums where, you know, they won't accept a 3/4 inch depth on a canvas, right? They, especially if it's not framed, sometimes they won't accept it at all. So that's something else to pay attention to. But you just want to make sure that you're considering, yes, you completed a piece of work, but now what is the final presentation, right? Like, how are you, because you have to remember, as soon as it goes up on the wall, like now the public is coming to see it. And, you know, for, I think both of our galleries, it's required that it's for sale. So you have to think about, you know, what the person coming in, which is essentially a customer, wants in their piece of art. They don't necessarily want to deal with having to take it to get it framed, and they may not understand maybe the right frame that goes with the piece. So they could, you know, essentially kind of make your artwork, I don't want to say look worse, but maybe not complement it, you know, the way you would envision it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. You do agree with, I don't know how I feel about that.
At the Art Garage, at least, when you submit artwork, in the call, it details that when you drop off your work, it has to be ready to hang. Yes. Whether that means framed,
talk about the ready to hang.
Right? Yeah. Whether that means framed or however that ends up working, but you want to think about how you want your work to be perceived by whoever is viewing it, other artists, potential purchasers.
Yes.
So it definitely is a very important part of the whole process, I would say.
Let's go back to ready to hang, because what we mean by that is a wire hanger on the back of your artwork. And it's funny because I think there's a lot of artists that, I understand framing is expensive, especially if it's done right. You know, especially if you go museum quality, you know, also take into consideration before I go back into the wire is if you are using glass, you know, make sure it's got a UV protectant on it. If, you know, so if people are hanging in their home, there's sunlight coming in, so your artwork doesn't fade. Also think about non-glare glass, right? So you prevent reflections. Those are all part of like your final presentation. Matting, I think Ellen kind of talked about that before. Are you matting it? How you're protecting your artwork basically when you're kind of finishing it. But that wire, that wire is really important, you guys, because we all have different hanging systems and they don't allow a sawtooth, right? And it's just, that's part of finishing your piece. And if you don't know how to do it, then ask somebody to help you, right? I don't know about you, but I'm usually spending more time sometimes fixing wires and fixing hardware on the back of people's pieces or adding it so it can be hung in the show. And now that's taking away for me promoting and hanging and getting the show ready. So again, everything should just be like presentation ready.
Right. And if you have questions about what is allowed, what you're able, what the gallery or museum is able to hang, again, it's always okay to ask questions about, can I do a sawtooth on the back? And if they say yes, then great. And if not, then you have to know that in the process of framing, matting, hanging, anything, you have to take that into consideration at the very beginning of the work, that it's all one package, that if you want your piece to ultimately end up hung up in the show that you submitted to, these are all things you have to take into consideration about what is allowed and what you have the ability to do.
I think also it's important, I know, and I should say at this point, as Carrie reminded us, there's going to be another one of these sessions in what, next month or something about photography?
December.
Pardon me?
December.
In December. So I don't think we need to get into details of photography, but you know, Alexis mentioned UV glass and museum quality glass and so forth. I think it's really important that when you photograph your work, if it is already framed and has glass on it, that there's no glare. That's a very simple thing. We actually once had recently, we looked at one where somebody propped their work up against their car to photograph it, which I'm not really sure why they did that, because it was so many aspects of wrong. I mean, it was like we were looking down at it. There was glare, the background was messy, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So it's not just about submitting a photograph, but again, as Alexis was saying and Haylie was saying, you need to understand how viewers are going to view it and let us know what that looks like.
I think kind of just quickly, because I know we've been talking about this a bit, kind of touching back on like, it's okay to overshare. I know when I used to work at the Lawton, like if we'd get a lot of like diptychs or triptychs or other multiples where it's like, okay, this isn't exactly a traditional display, but it's cool. But like, how do I, as like the person who didn't create it, how does it go up? How do I make it so that it's how it's supposed to be displayed? So coming up with diagrams and notes and really just writing out like on the back of the piece, like this is the left-hand side and this is the centerpiece, or however that might look. Over explaining is
that's great. That's a great point, because I've had we want to see, like, you know, we want unique artwork coming in, you know, we want to see people who are kind of pushing the envelope. So again, include, you know, like if you are entering, put a description, you know, explaining more about it. I mean, I've had some pieces come and we open it up, they literally like, this is the order they need to be hung. Or there's pieces where I've had to assemble them with like nuts and bolts, you know, because they're three-dimensional. If, you know, there's a special maybe display that, you know, if there's something special that's needed to make sure your artwork is seen and represented the way you want, ask, like, you know, what you're saying, reach out to us first, ask before you pay, you know, submission fee. But then, yes, give us the more information, the better, because we want to showcase it, you know, in the best way possible. And there's a lot of times where we can, you know, I mean, I've drilled holes, you know, in the wall in order to accommodate a piece, because that's how it was meant to be seen. So, we're not going to, like, you know, turn those down, but we need to know ahead of time to make sure we can accommodate.
And make sure that we can represent you the best way possible.
Yeah.
Did have one more question about Alexis mentioned clean, sharp images of your work with submissions. How important is the quality of your photographed images in a submission?
I mean, you can take a really good picture, you guys, on your phones nowadays. You're hearing that from a professional photographer. It comes down to just natural light is usually the best. You don't have to have a studio setting, so don't let that sway you from taking photos of your work. Ellen kind of mentioned, the setting you put it in. Keep it on like a solid background. Obviously, white is probably the best. So you're not having color shifting, but it's really, just make sure if it is a two-dimensional piece that, it's not tilted or there's any weird reflections or angles from it. And don't be afraid to like crop in. There's some really good apps on phones now. I mean, even just within your iPhone, you can go in, you can sharpen it, you can, correct it as far as exposure and anything like that. But those are really basic things. We're not looking for, I know we're not looking, it doesn't have to be.
It has to be with a DSLR camera
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
most expensive lens you can find.
Yeah.
It just needs to be well done enough that we can see, the details of the piece. And like we said, we want to represent you in the best way. We want you to represent yourself in the best way as well, so you have the best chance at showing your work. So that's probably.
I would also suggest if you do, like I do, I have a number of small three-dimensional things. That you can get a light box for really inexpensive. I think I got mine for $40 on Amazon. It's not the best one in the world, but it provides a consistent clean white background and good lighting. It's really worth it if you're doing a lot of calls to invest in something like that. Again, with an iPhone, and some light boxes even come with a little stand for your iPhone, that in a light box in an iPhone, you can get some really, really decent pictures. I've also occasionally submitted digital images. Actually, I think what Haylie and Laura both looked at from my last call, last submission to each of them were digital images and not photographs of the actual framed work itself. So that I think is a possibility as well.
And going back to photos real quick, this comes back to basics when you're kind of reading through your guidelines. A lot of our submission forms, because we're collecting all that data, we have a limit of the size of the image we can accept. So make sure you're reading that as well, because, let's say, she mentioned, a DSLR, which that's a professional camera for those of you who are photographers. Those take really large file formats. We don't need that. We don't need anything that large. And a lot of times if you're having issues submitting via the form, or you're like, oh, it won't take my image, that's typically why it's not sized correctly. So keep that in mind as well. You sometimes may have to resize if you are shooting, professional images. Yeah.
We are getting close to the end of time, and I did want to say that after this is edited and released, there will be a list of places that you can check out shows that you can enter that will be put out with the video. And I did want to give us just a few minutes to be able to pitch any of the current calls for art that.
Sure, I'll go. It just opened up, folks. Critters 4 is back. So it's the 4th annual year of Critters, which is anything that is not human. So we're thinking animals, insects, right? Fish, birds, any kind of animal, any kind of critter is for this show. This show was what the previous owner started it, and I'm going to continue it every year. The call is now open, and it will stay open until midnight on November 19th. You can find more information out on artlessbastard.com under Call for Art. Again, we just kind of switched over to using a different entry form, so we're hoping that everything runs smoothly with that. If you have questions and if you run into issues, please reach out, and I will do my best to help you troubleshoot that. So, but that should be a fun one. Yeah. Yeah.
We also have a call for art that has just opened recently for our last exhibition of the year that is going to be taking place December and January, called A Year in Review. The theme of this show is work that was created during the year 2021. So be sure if you submit that your work is current. Submissions are due November 11th. The run dates are December 1st through January 29th. It is $15 to submit up to 6 pieces, and it's via a form on our website, theartgarage.org, and then there's a tab that says for artists that lists our current artist opportunities.
I don't have any current open calls right now. I guess we're always taking submissions for our City Hall gallery, which is a gallery that we have inside City Hall. I can provide more information for anyone who's interested on that. But I wanted to plug the mayor's survey that he has out right now for ARPA funds. He is seeking community input on how to use those funds within Green Bay. I forget how much we got, a big amount of money. And our mayor, I don't know if you know this, he's definitely pro art. He is very invested and passionate about having art in Green Bay. If you have time to fill out that survey and say towards art within the community, I think he will definitely.
Question, Laura, which I think people for the public art calls, where can people normally find those when you do post them?
So when we post our calls, we share them on the city's page. You can sign up for notifications on the city webpage, because we send out like an email blast. I send those out. And then you could also sign up for our artist database, which I keep a running collection of artists. So when someone contacts me and asks, hey, I'm looking for a muralist, I send them this list. But in addition, I also send out our calls to that email list as well. So if you want to keep up to date on what we have, I highly recommend signing up for our artist database.
Is there anything else anyone wants to add before we adjourn for tonight?
Don't get us started. We covered a lot. I think I think that's a lot of information in a short amount of time. I mean, I think the biggest thing for all of us to reiterate is just make sure you take the time to read those guidelines, before you even start filling out the form.
I'm also going to say, if you're making art, keep making art. Just make art. And if it's good, it'll find a place.
Yeah.
Great.
Don't hesitate to reach out. Definitely. I think we're pretty cool, chill people.
We're here to help you. We're here to help you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so there are no back questions, and like I said, just make sure you're reaching out in a time frame where it's not like right up until deadline or an hour before the call closes, because I'm not going to be up at 11 p.m. Answering emails. But we are here. Like, I had a great question that just came in. And they got accepted into this next show, but they're like, hey, I can't deliver it because I live out of state. Is it okay for somebody else? Like, that's a legit question. And I'm like, of course, that's totally fine. Thank you for asking. So like you said, anything that comes up, feel free to reach out to us.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
Presenters, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us tonight. And for those of you who tuned in, thank you for being here and providing questions. We'll be doing this again next month. Erin, do you know what the topic is for next month?
I do not have that in front of me.
Oh, I sure do. I'll chime in.
Carrie does. Thank
Um,
you.
Next month, we are talking all about your artist stories. So we are going to have a number of artists sharing small stories and talking about kind of their journey as an artist and what they've put into becoming an artist and how that's worked for them. So it's going to be kind of more of a social event, which I think will be really fun, kind of change it up a little bit. And then December, we are talking all about photographing your artwork. So I'm glad we touched on it a little bit tonight, but I'm looking forward to some in-depth conversations about how to really get the best images of your artwork in December.
Thanks, Carrie. And thanks to everyone again, and have a great evening and keep making art.